Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. We have breaking news on two fronts. Sean Diddy Combs sentenced in New York, and Hamas partially, in fact, more than partially, accepting much of the 20-point plan for peace proposed by President Trump. Now, the spirit and the look of the takeout will assert itself eventually, I promise you. But we're in breaking news coverage now. I want to let you know Ed O'Keefe, White House correspondent, just to my left, and Margaret Brennan, who was just on our special report, will be joining us live here in the studio momentarily. And if she walks in, we will accommodate her and bring her on board as rapidly as possible. Until Margaret arrives, Ed, what do we know and how big a deal is this for the Trump White House?
Well, it appears to be a big deal because it appears that they are preparing to have him say something, not in the way where independent media are brought in to broadcast it, but in a way where it looks like they're taping something.
Inside the White House.
Inside the White House that will be released later over his social media platforms and then available to the world, which is watching this closely.
And we have been told the White House views what Hamas has said as mostly a yes.
Yes, at this point. And a good sign of that is that the president himself on his own social media account posted Hamas's statement alone, which is to say, look what they did. So they are saying now they want to negotiate. They want to, in essence, take up what the president has offered. And they were given extra time. Because remember, on Monday, when the Israeli prime minister and the president met, they said, you got 2 to 3 days. Well, here we are, day 5, essentially. And he was giving them until Sunday night. And we have this answer. And the answer is, in essence, yes, let's begin talking.
And the two big yeses, and I think these are very important to underscore and remind the audience about, return of all hostages, living and dead. The number is 48. Margaret said just a moment ago, 20 are still believed to be living. The remains of 28, these would be given back to Israel, a huge priority for the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and that Hamas would essentially take itself out of any of the governance of the Gaza Strip. Whether it departs and disarms, still to be determined, but taking itself out of that governing political equation, also a very large concession.
And in this 20-point comprehensive plan to end the Gaza conflict that the president released earlier this week, in essence, that's what Hamas has to do. They have to be willing to put down their arms, not be involved in the governance of the region once it's starting to be rebuilt. And in many cases, it's essentially saying to Hamas leaders, if you decide that you...
And Ed has indicated, arriving now, Margaret Brennan.
Hi there.
Someone who understands the details a little more.
Here at the big table, and what we do, like I said, the spirit of the takeout is always live and interactive and flexible. Margaret, I'm so very glad you're here. Ed was just picking up on some of the key things that Hamas has agreed to, enormous concessions driven by the president in collaboration with the Israeli prime minister. But as you just mentioned in the special report, weapons, whether they leave Gaza, and if they become or remain part of the larger Palestinian conversation about a state undetermined. But the hostages returned and taking themselves out of the governing structure of Gaza, enormous concessions.
Well, and one of the Hamas leaders was just on Al Jazeera television, and in that broadcast said that the weapons will go to those who run Gaza. I mean, these are tremendous statements for Hamas leaders to be saying publicly. Let's keep in mind they've been completely decimated in terms of the upper echelons of their leadership and some of their political leadership as well outside of the Gaza Strip. So for the White House to be positioning this as a major win, they are really trusting this public statement from Hamas. We know the president's taping this statement about Hamas's acceptance. They are possibly boxing in the Israeli prime minister to actually hold up his end of the bargain that he was in many ways strong-armed into earlier this week by the president, and that would mean an immediate end to the war. But we know from our folks who are inside Gaza that the assault has been pretty intense these past few days. So getting us to an immediate end to the war would truly be something. But even to get to this level of acceptance is a tremendous statement, frankly, by Hamas.
And it's reflective of a couple of things, it seems to me, Margaret, but I'd love your perspective, that Hamas had lost or was in the process of losing support within the region, whatever it left of it that was there, and was so militarily and from a leadership perspective weakened, almost to the point of having no other alternative but to try to accept something that would keep some part of Hamas alive, but outside of Gaza.
Well, in some ways, because in this deal, they are told they could get asylum by leaving. Now, I think they'll be tracked. Let's be real here. But yes, this is a way. I mean, that's where diplomacy comes in, trying to get both sides to say they walked away with some kind of win. Now, things that were left out of this deal that we know were in the original proposal were the wins for the Israeli prime minister. President Trump took out the original language from the 20-point plan that also said Israel will not annex the West Bank. That was excised. So there's some dealing here that's being done, and some of the terms of those 20 points that the White House published were very general for a reason. And that's where the negotiations have to happen in the next few days to figure out how do you implement a large part of this. But yes, Hamas upper echelons decimated. They have been able to recruit because, frankly, there's no alternative for many of these folks in Gaza in terms of, seeing an alternative path. And that's why you had this international effort led by the French and the Saudis to say, let's offer a political alternative and a different governing structure. So the French and the Americans are almost coming together in some ways by saying, we can help you create a political alternative.
Do we have any idea, Margaret, what a new governing structure in Gaza might look like?
Well,
and if it offers any kind of representative hope for those civilians trapped between a Hamas leadership they don't necessarily support and an Israeli military that is besieging Gaza?
If we believe what the White House published remains the deal, it says that Israel will not govern it, that the Gaza Strip, that is, that there will be an international body created that will have a board of peace governed by President Trump himself, it says.
Former British Prime Minister Tony Blair.
Right.
A significant participant, possibly.
And also has some baggage in the region that follows him, to put it mildly. But the reality of this is the powers in the region, such as Qatar, for example, and Egypt, will have to play a large role here in helping to implement this. Some of the other Arab states have also said, will help continue to train, by the way, security forces, as they had been doing already for the Palestinian Authority. It's just this will be more of a process. Now, you don't necessarily know yet how this will actually work, but we do know that there are numbers stipulated in here in terms of that first test of whether the Israelis release the 1,700 Gazans, including women and children they've detained, along with 250 life sentence prisoners, or whether Hamas releases and associated terror groups the 20 living hostages. That's going to be our first test before we get to the governing structure and all of that. But if you actually get to a Palestinian state out of this, that would be tremendous. The Israeli prime minister has made very clear he has zero interest in one, regardless of the statement.
We think it's Witkoff who takes the lead for the Americans, right?
Well, he has been the lead. I think the Secretary of State is usually involved in helping to bring alongside the Israeli partners. And we also have an interesting entrant here, Jared Kushner, who's not officially in the Trump administration.
But an interlocutor.
A huge part of this, in fact, the proposal for governance, a large part of that came from his plan. So he is involved very much so in this as well. Now, who shows up at the negotiating table, perhaps in Egypt as soon as next week, that's not yet clear.
And Ed, for the president and for the White House, we have, as Margaret laid out, some very key things to measure and evaluate in the next couple, 3 days, but the White House already positioning itself as this is reflective of and consistent with Trump leadership, Trump peace establishment, and a victory.
Yeah, I mean, we've heard this talk over the last several months about I've settled 7 wars and in the 7, well, more than 7 months now he's been there, but the 7 conflicts over the course of his first administration. This one, he'd like this one to be the 8th. In his view, it's not quite there yet. And Russia and Ukraine obviously is the trickiest of them all, but it plays into this idea that in my return to the world stage, I have helped stabilize and end a bunch of conflicts. This would be the mother of them all, as Margaret said, with the Palestinian state idea.
And Margaret, I'm told you have some new information?
Yes, our reporter inside Gaza, Marwan Al-Ghul, is reporting very heavy Israeli airstrikes are underway right now. You can read that a few different ways.
How would you read it?
You could also view that as they often hit hardest before they call something off. Or you could just view it as the continuation of the ongoing assault that's been happening for the past few days. But
and possibly a testing of White House tolerance.
So this is why, in this particular case, and this would be absolutely huge if President Trump closes this, and certainly people around him believe just getting to this point is huge. There is no government in the world who could pressure Israel the way the United States of America could in terms of our economic heft, our financial support, our military support, all of it. And so to close that end of the deal, and remember, even with that hostage deal that came together in that transition between Biden and Trump administrations, it was Steve Witkoff working alongside Brett McGurk from the Biden administration, and the Biden folks said, can you go close with Bibi? Can you get the Israelis to do this?
Right.
And so this is going to be a test. Can he get Israel on board? We know that the Qataris and the Egyptians and the Turks have been pressing Hamas to get even to this point. They're still being cautious. We're not seeing huge acceptance speeches from the Qataris yet. They are proceeding with caution, but saying this looks positive.
And every one of these points, let's just remember real quick, every one of these points, subject to negotiation, could take weeks, if not months, to resolve. And we're nowhere near the end.
A lot of wiggle room in there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Margaret Brennan, outstanding stuff as always. Ed O'Keefe, outstanding stuff as always. I'm grateful to you both. Thank you very much. I'm over here on camera 3. I'm going to read music mogul Sean Diddy Combs. This is our other second breaking news story. Just been sentenced to 4 years and 2 months in prison on prostitution-related charges. As our continuing news coverage and this breaking news environment continues, I want to turn now to CBS News legal reporter Katrina Kaufman, who is outside the courthouse in New York. Katrina, catch us up on the details and whatever reaction you are detecting outside the courthouse.
Major, it's great to join you. So yes, Sean Combs was sentenced to 50 months of incarceration and then 5 years of supervised release. What the judge told him is that he will still have a life after this. Sean Combs was really hoping to potentially even walk out of that court today. His team, Major, had actually set up a teaching engagement for him on October 6th with the hope that they were creating a plan for him when he got out of the MDC, where he has been for the last almost 13 months. And the judge's tone was very interesting because he began delivering this, Major, by praising Sean Combs, by talking about all of the iconic and incredible work that he's done as an entrepreneur. He said that he took into account all of these mitigating factors, his community ties, the work he's done, his family. But despite all of that, he said that the evidence was just overwhelming in this case. The violence, especially with the 2 women, the victims who spoke at this trial, Major. He said that for deterrence, it was important that he give a substantial sentence here to show that exploitation and violence against women are met with real accountability.
And Katrina, just very quickly, explain the gap between what prosecutors were advocating for, what the defense was seeking in terms of a sentence, and where the judge ultimately landed.
Absolutely. So the defense was asking for up to 14 months. Sean Combs has already spent about 13 months in the Metropolitan Detention Center, so that would have had him getting out almost immediately. What the prosecution wanted was a little bit over 11 years. The probationary report had said to give him 7 years. So the judge pointed out that he did actually go less than that recommendation. He said that he felt the prosecution's estimate was just too extreme, Major, but at the same time, the defense's was just far too short a time frame.
Katrina Kaufman, outside the courthouse, with all that breaking information and context, I thank you very, very much. Here's a programming note. Tonight at 9 p.m. and 11 p.m. Eastern, CBS News is airing a 1-hour special, Sean Diddy Combs, The Sentencing. You can watch that right here on CBS News 24/7. Still to come, the government shutdown. Well, it's dragged on today, and it will drag into next week. We will have the latest on the most recent failed votes to resolve all this and other details with Caitlin Huey-Burns. She joins us on Takeout next. Welcome back. I told you the Takeout would reassert itself in the sweet by and by, and here it is. Welcome back. The government shutdown will drag into next week. Earlier today, as expected, competing Republican and Democratic efforts to fund the federal government failed in the Senate. Want to go to Capitol Hill now, where Caitlin Huey-Burns has the latest. Caitlin?
Hey, Major. Well, it is very quiet up here around me. There's a couple of reporters next to me, but pretty much this Capitol is gone. Lawmakers have gone home for the weekend. at the realization that they're not going to strike any sort of deal anytime soon. The House announced today that they are actually not going to return at all next week. Their argument is that they've already passed their bill and it's still up to the Senate. The Senate went home just a few hours ago, having not reached a deal. You mentioned in that vote there. And they are not expected to come back until Monday afternoon, late afternoon. So the earliest that we could see any sort of movement here is Monday afternoon. And Major, I can tell you, I've covered a couple of these shutdowns before. I've covered the idea when we're on the brink of a shutdown. This feels so different from everything else for a few reasons, but one of them feels different because there's no real sense of urgency right now. Both sides are very dug in their positions. Yes, there are a couple of small groups meeting, but the two leaders aren't talking. Thune and Schumer aren't having conversations. Schumer told us today that it's really up to the president of the United States, and he thinks that public opinion on health care, and he pointed to a Kaiser Foundation poll that came out today that showed that even Republicans want those Obamacare tax subsidies extended. He seems to think that public pressure will build. Republicans, however, are staying firm in their position. You saw the president and the administration threatening to pause funding, threatening to lay people off entirely. They don't seem moved, at least at this point, by any of this. What we're watching for, though, Major, is in a few days, October 10th, paychecks will start to stop for federal workers who are furloughed. They'll get paid back later, but those will stop. And also, throughout the month, Democrats argue that people are going to be getting their statements from their health care programs because it's open market season, that their premiums are going up, and they believe that that will increase pressure. But it all remains to be seen. Bottom line, this drags out till at least Monday afternoon at the earliest.
Waiting for external events to assert themselves and change the dug-in politics that Caitlin Huey-Burns just described. Caitlin, as always, thank you so much. Washington Democratic Congressman Adam Smith joins me now. He's the ranking member of the House Armed Services Committee. So, Congressman Smith, always great to see you. Thanks for joining us. First of all, let's get your reaction to Hamas's partial acceptance, but its acceptance to two very big pillars of the Trump peace plan. Your reaction?
It's a positive step without question, but we have been here before. Over the course of the almost 2 years now of this conflict, there have been a lot of negotiations, a lot of offers on the table. So we've got a long way to go to make sure that both sides, both Hamas and the Israeli government, ultimately agree. I mean, they've agreed in principle, but as your report mentioned, Israel's still bombing, so the war clearly hasn't ended. And there is the distinct risk at this point that one side or the other will say, well, that's not what we agreed to, or the other side isn't following, they're violating the agreement. So we got a long way to go before we get to peace here, but it is a positive step. Let's just hope that it continues and it actually gets to an actual end to the war.
Congressman, in the last 3 minutes, President Trump on his social media platform has said Israel must immediately stop bombing, which Margaret Brennan, my colleague, mentioned was going on based on our reporting from producers in the region. That already suggests you're onto something, that there might be tension right now as we're discussing this between the White House and the Israeli government.
Well, I'm glad that President Trump is making those forceful statements. And look, I've been a supporter of Israel throughout this conflict. I understand what happened on October 7th. I understand the threats that Israel faces from Hezbollah, from Hamas, from Iran, from the Houthis, and what they have to do to defend themselves against this. But it's been several weeks now since there's been anything that could really be achieved militarily in Gaza. So I've called for an end to the war by Israel and choosing a different path to replace Hamas. I think it is time to ramp up the pressure on Israel if they don't follow what President Trump has laid out.
To the shutdown, Congressman Smith, is it only going to be external events, something bad happening or a collection of bad things happening that are going to change what Caitlin Huey-Burns accurately described a moment ago as dug-in partisan strife?
Well, I reject the partisan strife comment. I mean, that trivializes it. What's happening here is really important President Trump and the Republican Party, ever since they got into office in January, has ruled in the most partisan, dictatorial way that I've ever witnessed. They have completely ignored Democrats, jammed through their agenda, certainly never seeking Democratic votes, but even the president's gone beyond that. He has voided spending agreements, which he continues to do. Things that were in law, passed by Congress, signed into law, that the president just decided to unilaterally void. He's fired hundreds of thousands of people, frozen hundreds of billion dollars in programs. He just did it again a couple days ago, stopping funding of transportation projects in the Northeast that had been approved, and freezing billions of dollars in energy projects that, in many cases, were well on their way to completion. He has ruled and said, Democrats don't matter, we're not talking to you. And now, as we try to negotiate how to continue that budget, the Trump budget that we feel is having such a devastating impact, Mike Johnson said, we don't care what you have to say. We're not interested in talking to you. This is what you have to vote for. And it's like, well, if you want to rule that way, okay, fine, if you can get away with it. But when it comes time to actually ask for a Democrat's vote, why would we vote for that? Why would we vote for the budget that President Trump put in place? Healthcare is a huge part of it. Certainly, if this goes forward, as has been well documented, millions of people are going to lose their healthcare insurance. We want to stop that. But that is one piece of the larger puzzle. The Republicans have chosen to rule as if they are in an autocratic situation where Democrats don't matter. And now they're saying, oh, but you have to vote for this because we need your votes at this point. We're not going to vote for a budget that we think is having such a negative impact on the country.
So what's the X factor, Congressman Smith, that changes the dynamic you just described on their side and your side? Because to your point, I'll accept all the things you've outlined in your terms, but the administration, as you know, likes the things you've decried, and they're intending in this shutdown to do more of them. So what's the X factor that changes the calculus?
Well, the X factor is the Republicans wake up and realize that if you need Democratic votes, you have to negotiate. I mean, it's been just astonishing to listen to Mike Johnson say, I'm not going to negotiate. In fact, I heard him say on an interview I was doing earlier today that, well, we don't have anything to negotiate with. The Democrats sent us something that we don't like. Well, that's the nature of negotiations, Mike. All right, you didn't like it, send us something back. Instead of sending something back, he said, no, we're not negotiating. They have to accept what we offered, period, full stop. So they're going to have to change that. And you're seeing the pressure, as you reported. The country wants those health care things extended. They don't want millions of people to lose their health insurance. What has to change is the Republicans have to at least say, we're willing to negotiate. They step across that line, then we can start talking. But that's what has to happen first.
Congressman Smith, you've been good enough to stay with us into the next segment. I'm very happy to hear that because what we're going to talk about is this. President Trump ordered today this lethal strike on a suspected drug trafficking boat off the coast of Venezuela. The administration said it was part of its, quote, armed conflict with drug cartels. Congressman Smith will discuss whether that's legal and whether that's tactically shrewd for the United States government. That's next, right here on The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. I'm grateful to welcome back Washington Democratic Congressman and Ranking Member of the House Armed Services Committee, Adam Smith. Congressman, you heard me go into break about this latest kinetic military action in international waters, some 2,500 nautical miles from the United States off the coast of Venezuela. The administration has notified Congress that it's part of an armed conflict. Evaluate that based on legality and whether or not this is a wise allocation currently of U.S. military assets.
I don't believe it is. The president has launched us into another endless war. I mean, literally, he sort of said that. We're fighting all drug traffickers, apparently. So we'll get to the legality in a minute, but from a policy perspective, this is a conflict that has not even been remotely defined. Who exactly are we fighting, and what is the end state that we're looking for? This will presumably go on forever, and it is a major use of resources, and also it ramps up the conflict. We're starting a war, certainly with a number of different drug cartels, but potentially with Venezuela as well, if you listen to President Trump's rhetoric. So it's very problematic in terms of the level of the conflict. But second of all, the law in terms of armed conflict is you have the right to self-defense if you are facing an armed attack. Drugs are absolutely a scourge upon our nation. I happen to think that we should pay a lot more attention to the demand side of that scourge, discouraging people from demanding the drugs. But certainly you have to interdict what is coming in as well. But the law of armed conflict doesn't say that you can use lethal force from the military because someone is selling drugs in your country. This is a massive expansion of what the U.S. military is allowed to do. And also, they're not providing us with much in the way of information. They say who they hit, but we don't know if that's true. And we don't know exactly what their long-term plan is. So I don't think it's legal, and I don't think it's the right policy.
Is this a war powers resolution debate to come?
Yeah, but it's interesting because the war powers resolution, again, contemplates some sort of threat to the U.S. or some sort of approval from Congress. Yeah, it should be part of the war powers resolution. The law on that is you have to notify Congress, and then you've got 60 days to either get congressional approval or cease hostilities. As far as I know, we have not yet received that war powers resolution notification from the administration. They've been very opaque about this.
Congressman Adam Smith, I appreciate your time. Thanks so very much.
Thanks, Major. I appreciate the chance.
The White House is asking 9 U.S. universities to sign a pledge to uphold the administration's values on education. Access to federal funding could be put at risk if these 9 universities don't sign on. That's according to a new government memo. It says in part that signatories must change or get rid of entities that, quote, purposefully punish, belittle, and even spark violence against conservative ideas. The 9-page pledge also asks schools to freeze their tuition for 5 years and cap international student admissions, among other stipulated requirements. Layla Hudson joins us now. She is the faculty chair at the University of Arizona, where she's also a professor of global studies. Professor Hudson, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. I want to get your reaction. I'm sure you read this document from the federal government closely. What's your take?
Well, there are a lot of ideas in this document that people across the political spectrum have no problem with. And indeed, many things in it already align with our values, our goals, our aspirations. The problem is when the government tries to put these mostly good ideas and some ideas that require further discussion, debate, and civil discourse, when the government tries to put those ideas into an enforceable and punitive regime, that is a problem. So we want federal funds for our research. We need federal funds for our research. But to have those federal funds allocated to us on the basis of anything other than their scientific merit evaluated by experts is a problem. And it puts us at the top of a very slippery, very ugly slope.
Professor Hudson, I want to read to you a part of a letter you sent to the University of Arizona president. Let me quote you. I remind you of what you know well, that our institutional mission transcends all partisan politics and the dirty compromises that partisan politics demands. Our mission does not work without a bedrock commitment on the part of our leadership to everyone's freedoms, constitutional, academic, and otherwise. Have you got any response to that? And in that letter, in any way differ from some of the comments you made earlier that some of the ideas you found in the document are acceptable?
I have found almost unanimous approval of those basic sentiments. Again, no one is more equal than others. No one, especially the federal government, should be micromanaging the way we produce knowledge, the way we train students, again, which is in alignment with many of the ideas in that document. The practice is that we are always improving and always governing on our own mission are the ones that have made the United States academic system the envy of the world. Now is not the time to mess with that.
What would be the consequence at the University of Arizona if tuition were capped for 5 years and also international student admissions were either capped or lowered?
Well, capping tuition is an idea that I and so many of my colleagues strongly approve of. That's a great example of where there's no daylight between the ideas articulated in this document and the conventional wisdom in academia. And as for international students, we need to do everything that we can to continue to make American education available to students the world over. After all, international education is probably one of our top 10 export sectors as the United States. Currently, I understand we've got room to grow before we would get anywhere near that 15% cap. So there's plenty of room for business as usual and ameliorating the conditions that international students are experiencing. It hasn't been an easy time for them.
Professor Hudson, do you have any sense why University of Arizona became one of the 9 communicated to by the federal government?
I don't know that, but what I do see is an opportunity for our leadership and our values to come into dialogue with the administration and hopefully to make positive change. We have an opportunity here to educate, and that is what we do.
And do you fear, very quickly, Professor, that if University of Arizona says no, things will be withheld to the detriment not only of you, your department, and students?
I don't think so. I think that we are at the beginning of a dialogue. We have an opportunity to educate. We have learned over the last 5 years at our institution, and certainly over the last 6 to 9 months, to do more with less. Our mission will continue, fueled by the creativity of our people and the integrity of our traditions of freedom.
Professor Layla Hudson, University of Arizona, thank you so very much for your time.
Thank you.
Critics say Democrats have long had a messaging problem. A new Democratic think tank that says it's time for the left to either move over or move more to the center. Its founder joins me next, right here on The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. After a political party loses an election, there are recriminations and schisms. We're going to get to the schisms part right now because there's a schism, the Democratic Party, progressive and centrist, so-called. Adam Gentleson joins me now. He is the head of a new think tank, centrist defined, called Searchlight, right, Adam? Look over here.
That's right, Major.
You and I both know Searchlight is a town that Harry Reid was raised in, born in Nevada. So you, Adam Gentleson, are you the keeper of the Harry Reid legacy?
No, I would never try to claim that mantle. I think his legacy is far too big for any one person to claim that. But I would make a different claim, which is that, you know, Harry Reid would be purity tested out of today's Democratic Party.
He would?
Yes, I do believe that's true. You know, he was, as much as he's held up as a hero to many on the left these days for his sort of hardball leadership tactics, which is correct. And
correct,
was a big
no doubt.
Part of who he was when you covered Capitol Hill. We discussed this at length often. But, you know, he also was pro-life. He was pro-gun. At one point in his career, he favored the abolition of the 14th Amendment and birthright citizenship. So, yeah, I think those top...
Pro-mining.
Pro-mining, very big. You know, people think gaming is the #1 industry in Nevada, but actually it's mining. So he's a big defender of the mining industry.
So he would be written out of the Democratic Party as it's constructed today by the groups.
That's right. I think those issues...
Who are the groups?
Well, the groups are any interest group that is narrowly focused on a single issue and pushes Democrats to take extremist positions on those issues. So not every organization is a group, but the way to know if you're a group or not is if you are pushing Democrats to take a maximalist position on whatever is the issue that you exist to advocate for.
Climate change, trans fall into those categories?
That's right, but not inherently. It is there are positions on all of those issues that have broad support. The difference is that marginal interval where a group says, let's go beyond what has broad-based support. Large majorities of Americans favor protecting trans people from all forms of discrimination, from bullying, from bodily harm. Where you start to lose people is when you get to the extremes of that issue, and it's the same thing on climate change. So the groups are the ones who push Democrats not to seek out the broad-based areas where we can achieve supermajority support across a range of issues, they're the ones who push Democrats to take the extreme version of all of those issues.
So what does a think tank like Searchlight do in this space?
We try to do two things. The first is to produce a lot of analysis and polling that shows where the American people stand on these issues, because polling has become an advocacy tool. A lot of the things that
not an information tool.
Not an information tool. That's exactly right. We poll to seek out the truth, not to advance a certain point of view. We'll put out polls that conflict with our policy issues.
So, meaning, if I hear you correctly, Adam, some groups might put the thumb on the scale of their own poll to get a result that backs their position.
That's exactly right. And
then they feed that to lawmakers to tell them, stick with us or else.
That's right. They issue polls that make their positions look a lot more popular than they actually are. And that's, you can put their finger on the scale to actually cook the numbers. That's less common. Often what you do is you just cherry pick the results that see the light of day. So we're committed to transparency. Everything that we produce, we release publicly, even if it conflicts with some of our own policy positions.
Have you evolved? You were once lumped in with progressives.
Yeah, that's right. I think like a lot of people, I've gone through my own ideological journey. I started out most of my career working for centrist Democratic politicians like John Kerry, John Edwards, Harry Reid. And then I think between 2016 and 2020, with the rise of Trump and the rise of Bernie Sanders, there was a lot of questions about, is a different kind of politics possible? Is there this massive pool of voters that will turn out for people who take far left positions? And it turned out not to be the case. So I like to think of myself as somebody who takes new information into account and updates accordingly.
Did Democrats in the era of Trump say to themselves, he's so wrong, we must be right?
I think that's right. I think that they stopped thinking about what a positive, inspiring agenda could look like. Because one of the things Trump has done is he's presented, Trump is beating us, but he's still not winning over a large majority of the American people. He's winning over a pretty narrow majority. So there's still an opportunity for a party to come forward and to put forward an agenda that excites 60% of the American people. So we've fallen too easily into the reflexive opposition mode, and it's caused us to not think about what that positive agenda looks like that can marshal a supermajority.
Were you sick to your stomach watching 2024 play out?
Absolutely.
Go on.
Well, I think Biden should have dropped out. I think the president should not have run in the first place. I think there should have been a primary to determine who was the nominee. And then I think our nominee did not do a good job of drawing contrasts with the past administration and meeting people's desire for change. So it was pretty hard to watch.
Searchlight Institute's Adam Gentleson. It's been a pleasure.
Great to see you, Major.
Thank you.